The African Union just made a surprise trip to Burkina Faso. Yes, the same Burkina Faso once dismissed under Ibrahim Traore's leadership. Today, we are unpacking the diplomatic shockwave that's keeping Western envoys awake at night. The AES alliance is shaking the foundations of Africa's political order. And now, the AU is knocking on Traore's door, desperate to stay relevant. Before we continue, a big salute to our loyal subscribers. If you are new here and want the unfiltered truth shaping Africa's future, hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Alright, let's dive in. Picture this, the same African Union that suspended Burkina Faso in January of 2022, condemning their military government as illegitimate and threatening complete isolation, suddenly sends their top envoy, Tete Antonio, to Ouagadougou. The same organization that voted to suspend Burkina Faso's participation in all AU activities until the effective restoration of constitutional order. And now talking about listening missions and African solutions to Africa's problems. What changed? Was it the millions of social media views of crowds chanting Africa for Africans when Ibrahim Traore took power? Or was it something far more strategic and dangerous for the old continental order? The optics couldn't be more telling. Angola's representative, speaking for an institution that has historically rubber-stamped Western interests, suddenly discovering the principle of non-indifference when it comes to a revolution that's inspiring youth across the continent. But here's what they don't want you to know about why this diplomatic U-turn happened when it did, and why the AU is scrambling to stay relevant in a continent that's moving beyond their control. On June 17, 2025, the African Union Special Envoy arrived in Burkina Faso for what they carefully termed a listening mission. That's what I call diplomatic speak for damage control. This wasn't scheduled diplomacy, this was crisis management. Why? Because Burkina Faso, along with Mali and Niger, officially withdrew from ECOWAS in January 2025 and formed the Alliance of Sahel States, creating the most significant challenge to Western-backed regional architecture since independence. The timing reveals everything. While Nigeria was scrambling to host the West African Economic Summit between June 20th and 21, desperately trying to maintain ECOWAS relevance, the AU was making its own play to remain connected to a region that was slipping away. Antonio's mission was crystal clear: understand how three small countries had managed to expose the impotence of both the ECOWAS and the African Union itself. The delegation described their visit as seeking what collective path we can take as Africans to find solutions. But what they discovered in their meeting with Traore would force the AU to confront an uncomfortable truth about who really speaks for Africa's future. To understand this diplomatic earthquake, we must go back to September of 2022, when a 34-year-old army captain named Ibrahim Traore led a coup that removed Lieutenant Colonel Henry Damiba, who had seized power just 8 months prior. Unlike the typical African strongman narrative, Traore's rise deliberately echoed the revolutionary spirit of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's legendary leader, who was assassinated in 1987 for refusing to bow to French neo-colonial pressure. The parallels are striking and intentional. Both men came to power young, both rejected foreign military bases, and both spoke directly to Africa's youth about self-determination. Sankara, known as Africa's Che Guevara, had given Burkina Faso its name, Land of Honest People, eliminated foreign aid, and implemented groundbreaking pro-women policies, decades ahead of his time. The completion of Thomas Sankara's museum in May 2025, designed by renowned architect Francis Kéré, symbolically connects Traore's revolution to Sankara's unfinished vision. But where Sankara faced isolation, Traore found allies. Mali's Assimi Goïta and Niger's Abdourahmane Tiani joined him in creating the AES, turning three failed states into a confederation that now controls vast mineral wealth and refuses Western military presence. The African Union, which has spent decades legitimizing leaders who sold their country's resources to former colonizers, suddenly found itself facing a new generation that refused to play by the old rules. Here is the scandal the diplomatic class won't discuss openly. The African Union is losing relevance while a 34-year-old Burkinabe officer rewrites the rules of African sovereignty through concrete economic transformation. While Antonio spoke diplomatically about listening and understanding, the numbers tell a radically different story than what Western media narratives suggest. Burkina Faso's economy has grown at an average annual rate of 6.4% over the last 4 years, with GDP projected to reach $22.7 billion by 2025, making it the 20th largest economy in Africa. The real confrontation isn't about economics, it's about authority and resource control. Traore's government has nationalized gold reserve, established the country's first domestic gold refinery, and created national gold reserve for the first time in the nation's history. Through the state-owned mining company, Burkina Faso recovered 2 industrial mines and collected over 11 tons of gold in just the first quarter of 2025. When Traore announced his 2025 territory reconquest deadline, promising to recapture the remaining 30% of the territory from terrorist control after recruiting new army personnel, he wasn't just talking about defeating insurgents. He was declaring that African problems will be solved by African solutions, not French military interventions. The AU's sudden interest stems from a terrifying realization. If the AES model succeeds, it exposes every compromise African leaders have made with neo-colonial powers. The ripple effects of Burkina Faso's revolution are reshaping African geopolitics in real time, and the old guards are scrambling to maintain control. Despite Western media portraying Burkina Faso as the epicenter of global terrorism, the country has launched 25 massive development projects under Traore's leadership, including tomato processing plants, a modernized airport, and even plans for nuclear power development. International partnerships are multiplying. Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belosov held high-level talks with Burkina Faso's defense minister in May of 2025, with Russia describing Burkina Faso as a close friendly ally and promising enhanced military cooperation. But here's what's really keeping African leaders awake at night. The AES Confederation introduced biometric passports on January 29, 2025, with Traore himself receiving the first AES passport, symbolically breaking away from ECOWAS infrastructure. These aren't just travel documents, they represent economic integration without Western oversight, facilitating free movement of people, goods, and services within a resource-rich confederation. The Trump administration's USAID funding freeze, which cut about $312 million to Burkina Faso, has backfired spectacularly, with pro-government activists using it as evidence of foreign interference. Nigeria's President Tinubu's desperate invitation to the June Economic Summit, trying to lure AES countries back into ECOWAS, reveals the panic in traditional power circles as the regional bloc faces a 50% reduction in territorial size. What we are witnessing in Burkina Faso is the emergence of a new African consciousness that terrifies both Western capitals and their African proxies, amplified by a sophisticated digital strategy. Traore's rise has been driven as much by military action as by strategic digital presence, positioning him as a pan-African symbol of resistance. The AES Confederation represents something unprecedented. African countries choosing African partners over traditional donors, building continental integration from the grassroots rather than through elite-driven institutions. The irony is exquisite. The same African Union that spent decades legitimizing leaders who mortgage their own country's future is now begging for relevance from revolutionaries who refuse to accept the continent's subordinate status. Social media campaigns praising Traore as the people's captain aren't just viral content.
If you are an African and you think since Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they closed the West and the Americans, their military bases in Africa, their military bases in their countries, so these people have left them alone, then it might be in your dreams, because they are doing everything possible to get hold of them again. And the new thing that they have come up, the new strategy that they have come up to do with these countries, it is weird. Do you know Red Cross Society? We all know Red Cross because growing up as an African kid, we know Red Cross. Red Cross is one of the most respected humanitarian aid organizations that we all know in Africa. Even in Ghana, we have it here. It is a society that I have even joined them before to go on some excursions and those blah 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 things and so on and so forth. But right now, as I'm speaking, since these countries banned their existence in their country, they are using the Red Cross Society as a network. They are using that Red Cross Society to transport or import terrorism attacks tools. Like, I can't mention it here. They are using it as a network system to monitor the moves and the to and fro of these countries. So right now it is not about military again. So they are using that Red Cross Society, because you can't ban Red Cross because you will think they are helping you, they are giving you aid. They are building boreholes, they are building schools, they are doing things, blah 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 blah. So you think say they are helping you, but deep down they are doing something that you cannot see. So last week Niger came out with some news that they have made some research, and the conclusion that they got after they did the research is that they have seen, say, allegedly the Americans and the West, they are using the Red Cross Society that they have in these countries, which is Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. They are using that Red Cross to monitor their moves, to get information and send it to them. And they are using it. What makes it so dangerous is that they are using their system. They are using their system because it is a big company. It is a big time company. So they have flights and those helicopters and stuff. So they are using those helicopters to import into those countries ammunition to supply it to terrorists. So right now, as I'm speaking, if it turns to be true, the news that Niger came out about this thing that I'm talking, if it turns to be true, then it is getting weird. Then it is something else. So that is what I am about to break it to you.
So it looks like the BBC is continuing the time-honored European tradition of smearing independent African leaders to justify regime change. Here they're citing a report from Human Rights Watch accusing Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso of unaliving over 100 civilians. But I've learned that when it comes to Human Rights Watch, you have to read beyond the headlines, because they are very tricky in the way that they lie about global events. And if you read the fine print here, you'll see that Traore's forces were actually fighting against Islamist extremists aligned with Al-Qaeda. And after this attack was launched, the Islamist extremists responded by unaliving a bunch of civilians. And look at how Human Rights Watch frames this. They say that the Islamists were assisting the government. No, they were fighting the government. They were actively unaliving each other. And then when the government forced out the Islamists, they retaliated by unaliving a bunch of civilians. And then when BBC put that into a headline, they removed all of the context and made it sound like only the government was unaliving civilians. It's some of the most disgusting and reprehensible journalistic trickery I've ever seen, but this is par for the course for Human Rights Watch. When I read beyond their headlines, I am always amazed at how misleading the headlines actually are. The reality is that 40% of Burkina Faso is controlled by extremists, and Ibrahim Traore is leading the struggle against them, which is why he needs to be protected from the West and their propaganda at all costs. If you're an American, you can join the American Communist Party, as we're actively fighting to bring an end to US imperialism. Africa is going to see so much political and economic development once they get the boot of the Western imperialists off of their neck, and that's what Traore is fighting for.